the shoemaker who mended a village's dreams. In a small English village called Bellwood, there stood an old shop at the end of a cobblestone road. The faded wooden sign read, "Elliot, Village Shoemaker." Elliot was a quiet man in his 50s, with kind eyes and hands shaped by years of work. He lived alone with his little dog, Max. Every morning, he opened his shop early, sat by the wooden table, and stitched worn-out shoes with patient precision. And people said Elliot could bring dead shoes back to life. But what they loved most was this: he never refused to mend a pair of shoes, even if the owner had no money. One cold winter morning, a boy named Oliver walked into the shop. His feet were red from the frost, and his shoes were nearly falling apart. Elliot looked up and smiled. "These shoes have traveled quite a journey, haven't they?" Oliver lowered his head. "I just need them fixed. I walk 5 miles to school every day." Elliot studied the cracked leather and worn soles, then looked into the boy's bright eyes. He said nothing, just nodded gently. That afternoon, when Oliver returned, the shoes were spotless and sturdy again. Elliot had reinforced the soles, lined them with soft leather, and polished them till they shone. I don't have any money," Oliver stammered. Elliot smiled warmly. "That's all right. Just keep walking. Shoes help you move forward, but it's your heart that decides where you'll go." From that day on, Oliver stopped by every morning to greet Elliot before heading to school. One day, he whispered, "There are more kids like me. They can't afford shoes for winter." Elliot nodded silently. That night, when the village was asleep, his lamp still glowed. He gathered every scrap of leather, every bit of thread, and turned them into shoes for the village children. Word spread quickly. Each morning, people left old shoes and notes by Elliot's door. "These were my husband's shoes. My son needs them for work. My daughter needs these for school. Please help Elliot never turned anyone away." He worked late into the night, stitching quietly, smiling softly. On the wall above his workbench, he replaced his price list with a handwritten sign. "The cost of every pair is a smile." One evening, an old friend named Mr. Miller, owner of a leather workshop, came by and shook his head. "Elliot, what are you doing?" "You fix shoes for free. How do you survive?" Elliot looked up from his stitching, eyes shining behind his glasses. "I survive on the joy of seeing others walk again." Mr. Miller didn't reply. The next morning, Elliot found a bundle of new leather rolls by his door. From that day, someone, perhaps Miller, kept leaving supplies every week. 3. The storm then came, the storm of that year, the fiercest in decades. Roofs blew away, streets flooded, and Elliot's little shop was destroyed by water. The leather, the shoes, the tools, all gone. While everyone rushed to repair their homes, Elliot quietly tried to save what he could. He sat by the window, wringing out wet leather, whispering to Max, "Shoes can be mended, dreams too, as long as we don't give up." But there was no more material left to work with. Outside, the wooden sign creaked weakly in the wind. "Elliot, Village Shoemaker?" The letters were almost gone. Days passed. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. When Elliot opened it, he saw Oliver, now a young man, standing there in the rain carrying a large sack. Behind him were dozens of villagers, people Elliot had once helped. They stepped inside, their arms full of leather, thread, and shoes. Oliver smiled, his voice trembling. "We've come back, Mr. Elliot. You mended our shoes and our dreams. Now it's our turn to mend yours." Tears welled up in Elliot's eyes. He looked around. The shop, once silent, was now filled with laughter, hammering, and the soft rhythm of sewing needles. That night, the light from Elliot's window glowed brighter than ever. Bellwood, a small forgotten village in the winter rain, felt warm again because kindness had returned home. Years later, Elliot passed away peacefully in his sleep. On his work table lay an unfinished pair of shoes and a note written in his careful hand. Keep mending dreams, even if it's just one stitch at a time. The villagers decided to keep his shop exactly as it was. They turned it into the House of Dreams, a place where poor children could get free shoes and learn the craft of shoemaking. In front of the shop stood a small statue of Elliot with Max by his side. On the base was engraved, he didn't just mend shoes, he mended weary steps. He didn't just give shoes, he gave hope to walk again. Some people live quietly without fame or fortune, yet they heal an entire community with their gentleness. Elliot, the humble shoemaker, left behind no wealth, only shoes stitched with love and dreams repaired with compassion. And somewhere out there, in every town or city, there's always someone like Elliot, a quiet soul who believes if you can help someone take one more step forward, you've already walked a beautiful road yourself. The carpenter who built his last house. For more than 30 years, Thomas Hale had been known across the small mountain town as the man who could build a house that felt alive. He wasn't rich, but his work was. Each beam he touched seemed to hold warmth. Every door he hung opened with a kind of grace. People said Thomas didn't just build houses, he built homes. But time has its own way of sanding us down. His hands began to tremble, his eyes grew dim, and the hammer that once sang in rhythm with his heart now felt heavy as stone. After one long winter, Thomas decided it was time to retire. He told his longtime employer, Mr. Brooks, a kind, wealthy man who had trusted Thomas for decades. "I think I've built enough roofs for one lifetime," Thomas said quietly. "I'd like to rest now, maybe spend more time with Ellen and the kids." Mr. Brooks nodded thoughtfully, then smiled. "Tom, I understand, but I have one last favor to ask, one more house. After that, you can hang up your hammer forever." Thomas hesitated. His heart wasn't in it anymore, but out of respect, he agreed. Just one last house, he thought. Then it's over. When he began, the spark was gone. The cold morning air that once filled him with purpose now felt heavy. He skipped the careful measurements he used to swear by. The wood he once inspected with pride, he now accepted with flaws. The nails weren't driven straight, the joints weren't sanded smooth. "It'll hold," he murmured. "Good enough." Weeks passed, and the house rose, awkward, uneven, lacking the quiet perfection that had once defined his work. Thomas didn't care. His mind was already elsewhere, on his porch, on his wife's tea, on the silence he thought he'd earned. Finally, one golden afternoon, the job was done. Mr. Brooks came to see the finished house. He walked around slowly, his eyes soft, his hands in his pockets. Then, to Thomas's surprise, he reached into his coat, pulled out a small envelope, and placed it gently in the carpenter's palm. "This," he said, smiling, "is for you." Thomas blinked. "For me?" Mr. Brooks nodded. "Yes, Tom. It's yours. You've spent your life building homes for others. I thought it's time you had one built by your own hands." For a moment, Thomas couldn't speak. His throat tightened. He turned and looked at the house, his house, the roof that didn't line up, the door that stuck when closed, the uneven steps. Every careless mistake now screamed back at him. His heart sank. All those shortcuts, all the times he said, "Good enough." Now he would have to live inside those choices. He felt a sharp ache, not in his body, but in his spirit. The man who had once taken pride in every detail had built, at the end of his life, something unworthy of himself. He realized that while he thought he was building for someone else, he was, in truth, building his own story. That night, he sat on the front steps of the crooked house. The wood creaked under his weight. The wind passed through the gaps in the wall. For the first time in many years, Thomas wept. He wasn't weeping for the house. He was weeping for the man he had allowed himself to become. In the quiet of that evening, he whispered into the dark, "I built this house as if it didn't matter, and now I must live in it." The next morning, before sunrise, he returned to the workshop. He chose better wood, stronger nails. He repaired each flaw one by one, not to impress anyone, but to heal himself. Each hammer strike was an apology. Each polished edge was a promise. When he was done, the house wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was his, in every true sense of the word. A neighbor passing by asked, "Tom, why fix it all over again?" It already looked fine. Thomas smiled faintly. "Because I learned too late that everything we build with our hands or our hearts stays with us. I just want to live in something I can be proud of." Years later, children from the town would walk past the wooden house by the lake and say, "That's where the old carpenter lives, the one who rebuilt his own home." They never knew the full story, but those who did often shared it as a quiet reminder. Every day, in everything we do, the choices, the words, the effort, we are building our own house. The walls are our habits, the roof is our faith, and the foundation is our heart. And one day, we will have to live inside what we built. When the sun set behind the lake, Thomas sat by the window, the golden light bathing the walls. His tools hung quietly in the corner, his hands resting on his lap. Finally still, he looked around and whispered, almost to himself, "Do it with care, even at the end, because the last house you build is the one that defines you."